I've never really talked about my religious views, either on like this channel or really any other kind of social media, honestly. Sorry, busy street. I wanted to talk about how I became agnostic and then later on an atheist. I was raised religious, Christian, I believe Scottish Presbyterian. My dad's side of the family was Scottish Presbyterian, and I have like pretty fond memories of those early church experiences. Those like first few years of first going to church. I think from the age of like 5 to 7, that kind of thing. Those were good times because one, it was a small town, so I knew everyone there. You know, that's kind of one of the things that makes one of the good things about like church religion. I think is the community aspect, and that's I think the biggest example that you can see is whenever you visit a small town because there's always going to be a big church community. Any part of Canada, I'm sure this is a big thing in the U.S. too. Um, but anyway, yeah, everyone knows everyone there. Even the kids, they all know each other. They all go to the same school. So my friends all went there. So it was kind of just like getting to hang out with your friends while also learning about biblical stuff. Usually Old Testament. We didn't really learn New Testament stuff until we were maybe around 7, that kind of thing. Um, like it's all I feel like maybe it's because the Old Testaments there's so many different stories and that kind of like entices kids more, that makes kids more interested. Like you can switch from Adam and Eve to the Exodus. You can then go down to like Solomon. Like there's a bunch of different stories to tell kids basically, so that's usually what churches start with, before moving into the New Testament, which is all centered around one person, Jesus, and telling his life story from multiple different perspectives. Um, so overall, I enjoyed kind of those early years of church, and I kind of appreciate those aspects of religion, the community aspects. But even back then, there were things I learned later on in life that kind of soured that a little bit. One example was the first church we went to, which we moved to, I think, after about a year. Um, the minister of that church was a young woman, I think in like maybe her late 20s, early 30s. She was kind of more, I guess, more of a liberal Christian. She was really good at talking to young people about Christianity, and she had a lot of progressive ideas, from what I understand. And a lot of the older churchgoers who had a lot of influence in the town, they didn't like a lot of the stuff that she was saying to the kids. They didn't like these progressive ideas she was giving, kind of these tolerant ideas. Um, and it kind of started almost, it almost became like a harassment campaign against this minister. Like they wanted to like get her removed from the church. It's crazy too. Like they won't do that when there's like a priest molesting people, but they'll do that when a woman starts saying things a little out of turn. A little weird, isn't it? So she ended up like having like a straight up mental breakdown. Left that church. I think she moved to a town like not too far from where we were. This was in kind of southern Ontario, near Ottawa. And she ended up becoming very successful in that other town as a minister. So that's good. But it just kind of showed that kind of that side of religion, even the community aspect, that can be kind of wrong and can lead to people just being like nasty to others because they don't agree with them, because they're an outsider in some way. And also related to that church, before we moved, because my mom was really pissed about this and she just straight up wanted to move churches, and that's what we did. But before that, there was this younger like I think minister in training or something like that. That was usually with the lady minister. Sorry, to give a little bit more background. So the minister, she had this thing that she would do for my sister and I, where she would let us ring the church bell every time we went to church on Sunday. It was just kind of this nice thing that she did for us. Like she was just that kind of person, you know. And after she was gone, the guy who was kind of like, I don't know if he was in charge after her or something like that. I don't know, but anyway, he offered to take me to go ring the bell. Like, hey, do you want to come with me and you can ring the church bell? And I was like, yeah, yeah. And then my sister, because she was usually also brought along, but he didn't invite her. She was like, hey, I want to come too. And the guy was like, okay, you can come. And like, I guess she never really thought anything of it at that time. And I don't even really remember this all that well, but she remembers this. We went to go ring the church bell. Nothing happened. But later on, like a couple years ago, she like talked to me about it, and she was like, looking back, I think that guy was trying to get you alone to molest you. Um, and I was like, holy shit, I think you're right. Why else would he ask me, just me, to come ring the bell alone with him? Right? Like, the lady, she always brought my sister and I, like both of us. We both got to like come ring the bell, or like one of us would do it each time or something like that. So the fact that he just asked me to come and was upset that my sister wanted to come too, like it was because he wanted to be alone with me, and the fact that he couldn't do that like annoyed him. And she ended up thinking like, oh, I guess I was just kind of being a brat who wanted to like get involved when it wasn't really, I wasn't invited to. But really, she probably just saved me from getting, you know, molested by a priest. Um, so, you know, I'm very thankful for that, obviously. Very glad that she did that, even though it wasn't, she didn't intentionally save me. It was just she wanted to be involved. And by me not being alone for that instance, I didn't get, you know. So that's good. Anyway, so those are kind of the things that kind of soured that aspect of those early years for me. But overall, I think that, like, you know, it was okay. You know, going to church, the people that I met there, like, it was all fine and good. There were some stories that didn't sit well with me, but it's like, you know, overall, I think that it was an okay experience. It was only when I got a bit older, I would say between the ages of like 11 and 12, that we started going to this new church, more in kind of central Ontario, closer to Toronto. It was one of those churches that wasn't really in a church, but was in like a school, basically. You know, like a school auditorium would be the place where they had the actual sermon. And then there would be like classrooms that they would have the Sunday schools in. So that was very new for me. I had always been in actual churches growing up, so that was very strange. They were like red flags, I would say, that stuck out to me in those Sunday school classes. So one of the things early on was we learned about Abraham and Isaac for the first time. I never learned this story early on, and I think that for the most part, children aren't really taught this story until they're much older, because it's just such a, it's like alien, you know. It's something that you just can't really justify. It's the hardest. It's arguably the hardest story to justify in the entire Bible, easily. Of course, if you know, I'm sure most of you know, but the story is basically Abraham is told by God to sacrifice his only son Isaac after going years, becoming an old man, never having a child with his wife, finally being gifted a child by God, and then being ordered to kill that child. I remember that really bothered me. And one of the things that, like, looking back, I found very insidious about how they were teaching this to us is that they tried to excite us about what was going to happen next. Like, they gave us like these sheets that would give us an opportunity to predict what would happen. Like, is he going to do it? Like, what is he going to be, like, be brought back to life? Like, what do you think is going to happen? Almost all of the kids guessed that Abraham was going to kill Isaac, that he was going to do it, which is crazy looking back on. I think that is like a prime example of indoctrination. Instilling the idea that killing your own family member because God told you that that's a good thing. You know, I think that that's like one of the highest examples of indoctrination. That's why I don't think that story should be taught to children at all. Like, that's something that you should be taught when you're like maybe a teenager, something like that. That, like, and the moral of that story is just one of obedience. It's not one of like goodness. It's not one of being caring. It's not one of helping the needy, anything like that. It's not about turning the other cheek, definitely. Um, the only moral in that story is be obedient to God or else. That's it. It's like that's what they were trying to make us believe, that if God wants you to kill a family member, you have to do it. And that didn't I didn't get it to that level until I got a little bit older and started thinking about it more. And I'm like, holy shit, this is what they were trying to tell me. Absolute loyalty. That's all they were saying. They were making us okay with Abraham sacrificing Isaac. That they were trying to make us think it's okay. Later on, I think the thing that stuck out to me the most, this was later on. This was before I got moved to the actual sermons, which just put me to sleep. I barely paid attention to those when I got moved out of the Sunday school. We started learning about creationism. And before this point, basically all the churches I went to, they just never talked about evolution. They just didn't, they just told the story, you know, they told the story of, you know, Noah's Ark, shit like that. They didn't like say scientists are wrong, evolution is wrong. They never went in that direction, because it's like, what's the point? So this was the first time that I had gone to a church where they were like actively arguing against science. And that was probably one of the first times I had like heard something in church and then was like, no, that's wrong. I wasn't open about it because I realized that every other kid in that class was a straight up creationist. Like, I think I said something at some point that implied that I believed that humans were related to apes. Well, humans are apes, but... And the kid that was sitting next to me was like, wait, do you believe in evolution? And I was like, no, I don't. Because like from his tone of voice and the look on his face, he said it like I was like, I believed that murder is okay or something like that. Like the way he said it, it was like he was horrified by the possibility that I was a believer in evolution, which is like, I never even thought of it as believe in evolution. I just knew what it was. But later on during that class, he started talking about dinosaurs. That's my trigger. Dinosaurs are my thing. I've loved them since I was probably like 2 or 3 years old. I think one of my first words was pterodactyl. Since I was very young, I knew that the world was like billions of years old. Like dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. So I was like, oh, okay, the world's old. Like, it wasn't like shocking to me or like strange. Even the idea that humans were related to apes, that didn't shock me. I'm like, makes sense. We really do look alike. Like, same hands, pretty much. Same overall like body shape. Same eyes facing forward. Same overall kind of nose. Like, we just have more cartilage here. But if you look at us from this angle, we kind of just, it doesn't look that different. Yeah, we're all same ears. Like, yeah, of course we're apes. What else would we be? What else do we look like more? But anyway, this guy's talking about dinosaurs, and he clearly doesn't know what he's talking about. He's talking about how So when dinosaurs are living during the time of Noah, that kind of shit, I'm like, that's fucking crazy. And he's saying like there's proof that the Great Flood happened because there's been like fossils of seashells found on like mountaintops, things like that. And this was before I knew that mountains weren't always mountains. You know, it's like from the tectonic plates pushing against each other, mountains are kind of like formed from the earth like folding pretty much. So like the earth's crust folds upwards, and that's what creates mountain ranges. I didn't know that at the time, but even before that, I knew that like most of the world was covered in water in a certain point of early history. Like I knew what trilobites were, things like that. So I'm like, yeah, that doesn't prove that the Great Flood happened. Like, what do you mean? And I didn't speak up until he said that the dinosaurs died out during the Great Flood. That was the point where I was like, sir, isn't it true that dinosaurs died during a meteor strike? And he didn't like argue with what I said. He basically just said, well, that would support evolution. And then just said nothing and was just looking at me and letting the other kids look at me because that was the point. He didn't try to like argue with what I was saying. He didn't try to correct me. He just silenced me. That was it. Just what you're saying would support evolution, therefore it's wrong, therefore what you're saying isn't true. And all the other kids are looking at me like I just said that like the earth is flat, basically. That was probably my like first stepping stone out of getting out of religion, kind of becoming a little bit more agnostic. But it still took a long time for me to actually reach that point of like realizing God probably doesn't exist. I even remember there was like a point, because I think this is probably something that's happened to other atheists too. Like I'm curious if anyone else has had this experience. After you start like having like really big doubts about religion or about God, and sometimes you basically reinforce the religious ideas to kind of push down the doubts, the science, that kind of stuff, the reality. So basically, for I think like maybe a year from the age, I think like when I was about 14, this happened. I started becoming like uber religious. Like I was reading the Bible almost every day. I was like talking about religion like in weird, like out of context times, like when it wasn't relevant. Um, that went on for like over a year, I'm pretty sure. And then I think when I was around the age of 15, during it was sometime during the middle of the year, because it was definitely not like a split second decision. I can't remember the exact moment that I was like for sure, or that I had like that kind of that switch, because I don't think there was like an immediate switch. I think it was very gradual. But I think the idea that was kind of really holding me back was the idea of death, really. The idea that I would stop existing someday. And I think when I realized that that's really what I was holding on to, this fear that there isn't an afterlife, that when you're dead, you're just dead. That's when I started to really question it. And I think I think one of the things that kind of helped me through that idea was actually an episode of House. Um, there's an episode of House where he's talking about how he doesn't believe that there's an afterlife. How when you see the white light, it's just kind of the chemicals firing when your brain is shutting down, basically. And he said something that really stuck with me.
My choice has no practical relevance to my life. I choose the outcome I find more comforting.
Find it more comforting to believe that this is it?
I find it more comforting to believe that this isn't simply a test.
And I was like, that kind of makes sense. Yeah, like what is the point of life, like human life, your mortal life, if it's all just a way to prove that you are worthy of this eternal life, when you really think about it that way, it kind of just makes life itself so much more meaningless. And it's like, why would you want that? Once I like kind of had that idea in my head, I think that is what made me finally comfortable with the idea that God didn't exist. And once I was comfortable with that idea, it was like nothing to basically believe it, or to stop believing, I should say, because it's not really correct to say that I believe that God doesn't exist. That's not really accurate. I just don't believe in God. That's the proper way of saying it. To believe in God is an active thing you are doing, and I'm simply not doing that, therefore I do not believe in God. That's simply it. It took a long time for me to reach that point, but that is where I'm at. There's no real set rule for the universe. There's no set morality, because life is just like a constant fight for survival. That's all it is. Life exists to like eat other life forms, you know? You can't, anything that lives has to eat. Therefore, anything that lives causes death. That in itself is kind of like a paradox, you know? It's like, how could God be this all-loving being when he created a world that deliberately has like suffering? And of course, the justification is Adam and Eve. You know, why did all the animals get punished? Why did all the animals get punished for what Adam and Eve did? And a snake, which is implied to be Satan, but that's later. Yeah, I don't know. There were just things that I just started to question more and more, and I think I started even rereading the Bible after that and finding more and more things that bothered me. And I was like remembering all these different stories, and I was realizing like, yeah, there's problems with this, you know. It's not even just that, you know, I don't believe, like, there's a lot of it that's wrong, you know. Science aside, it's like there's so much in the Bible, in many religions, that is just morally wrong, and that we should just be free to speak against, you know. And I feel like there's this new like movement of almost anti-atheism, where you can't really talk about this stuff anymore, where it's deemed inappropriate or rude to question religious ideas or religious doctrine to a religious person. I have a lot of like sympathy and empathy for religious people, but at the same time, God can be criticized. He's not your friend, you know. He's not some guy, you know. You know, if I'm saying something about God, that's not an affront to you. It's not an insult to you. I just don't believe in God. I have to like avoid talking about this with so many people, because just saying I don't believe in God is offensive to a lot of people. Just that statement alone doesn't affect them in any way, doesn't hurt them. It's not like God is some guy they know they've known since childhood, like their best friend or something like that. It's like, it doesn't affect you at all. Like, even if he was a real person, like, who cares? I don't believe in Bob. I don't believe Bob is real. Show me Bob, or I don't believe him. It doesn't affect you at all. So, you know, that's really all I wanted to say. I went on a bit of a tangent, but, you know, this is something I've been kind of, I guess, bottling up, and, you know, I feel like this is the best place for me to talk about it. So, yeah, hope you enjoyed whatever this was, and yeah, stick around. Bye-bye.